When my husband, Robert, died, my daughter, Serena, inherited our house and $33 million. Then she threw me out, telling me, "Find another place to die, you're useless now." The biting autumn wind whipped strands of my silver hair across my face, stinging my eyes with cold. I sat hunched on a splintered park bench, far from the manicured lawns and stately oaks of the lakeside estate that had been my home for 50 years. 50 years. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memory of Serena's cruel words, hissed through a thinly veiled smile, was as fresh as a wound. Useless. The word echoed in the vast, empty cavern of my chest, a cruel taunt. My hands, once deft at baking pies and tending roses, now trembled faintly as I clutched the worn fabric of my purse. Inside, a paltry sum, what was left of Robert's small, designated allowance for my personal expenses before the will was read. An allowance Serena had begrudgingly doled out. The afternoon sun, weak and watery, cast long, mournful shadows across the damp grass. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby playground, a sound that ordinarily would have filled me with a quiet warmth, now only served to highlight my profound isolation. I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had once been the center of a bustling, prosperous home, now reduced to a specter haunting a public park. My mind, a persistent, unwelcome companion, dragged me back to the golden years, to the life I had built with Robert. He was a man of quiet strength, a sharp mind cloaked in an easy smile. He built his empire from scratch, a shrewd businessman who always came home to me, to us. Our house on Lakeview Drive, with its wide porch overlooking the shimmering expanse of Lake Michigan, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the repository of 1,000 memories. Summers filled with the scent of pine and fresh-cut grass, winters cozy by the roaring fireplace, the soft hum of life unfolding within its walls. And Serena. Our beautiful Serena. She was everything to us. From the moment she entered our lives, a tiny bundle of pink and hope, Robert and I had doted on her. She was a bright, vivacious child, quick to laugh, quick to learn. I remember teaching her to bake cookies in that very kitchen she now claimed, her small hands dusted with flour, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Robert would spend hours in his study, painstakingly building dollhouses for her, his large hands surprisingly delicate with miniature furniture. We gave her everything. Education, opportunities, unconditional love. We believed we had raised a good woman. How wrong we were. The shift had been subtle at first, a gradual chill that seeped into her demeanor as she grew older. The youthful sparkle in her eyes transmuted into a glint of something colder, more calculating. She married Jacob Fitzgerald, a financial advisor whose ambition mirrored her own, but lacked Robert's underlying integrity. Together, they formed a formidable, if chilling, alliance of avarice. When Robert's heart, always so strong, finally gave out a month ago, it felt as though the very air had been sucked from my lungs. One moment, he was laughing about an old memory, his hand warmly clasped in mine, the next, he was gone. The shock, the grief, had been overwhelming. I barely registered the funeral arrangements, the hushed condolences, the endless blur of faces. All I knew was the gaping void he had left behind. Through my fog of sorrow, I did notice Serena. She was efficient, almost chillingly so. While I wept silently in the study, surrounded by Robert's familiar scent and the echoes of his voice, Serena was on the phone, her voice crisp and businesslike. Paperwork, she'd say, details. It seemed she was less concerned with her father's passing and more with the administrative aftermath. I dismissed it then, attributing it to her strength, her practical nature. Oh, how naive I was. I was lost in grief, and she was already calculating. The vultures had gathered, and I, it seemed, was merely carrion. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, ran down my spine. The park bench was hard, the air growing colder as dusk approached. I had nowhere to go, no home, no husband, no daughter. Just a small bag of essentials and the bitter taste of betrayal. My life, as I knew it, was over. Or so I thought. Deep within me, beneath the layers of despair, a tiny ember began to glow. A spark of defiance, a whisper of a question. Why, Robert? Why would you do this? It was a question that demanded an answer that would lead me down a path I never expected. My story, far from ending, was just beginning. The air in Mr. Harold Sterling's downtown office was thick with a tension that pricked at my skin. It wasn't just the stale scent of old paper and polished wood, it was the unspoken expectation that hung heavy, a predatory quiet. Serena sat beside me on a plush leather sofa, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the mahogany desk, as if she could already see the millions tallied there. Jacob, her husband, a man whose smile rarely reached his eyes, sat opposite her, mirroring her intense focus. I, Eleanor Vance, felt like an unnecessary prop, a ghost at my own undoing. Mr. Sterling, Robert's longtime attorney, cleared his throat. He was a man of precise movements and understated presence, his silver hair neatly combed, his dark suit impeccable. He held a thick sheaf of papers, the official last will and testament of Robert Vance, and the rustle of the pages sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. We are here today for the formal reading of Mr. Robert Vance's last will, Mr. Sterling began, his voice devoid of emotion, a professional neutrality that bordered on cold. As you know, Mr. Vance passed away unexpectedly on October 12th. He paused, allowing a moment for decorum, but no one spoke. Serena merely tightened her grip on her purse. He launched into the preamble, legal jargon blurring into an incomprehensible drone. My mind drifted, still lost in the recent past. Robert's funeral, a blur of black suits and hushed voices. His favorite jazz music playing softly in the background. The way Serena had bustled around, ensuring every detail was perfect, her efficiency almost clinical. Even then, my grief-addled brain registered a flicker of unease. She was managing the event, yes, but there was a certain detachment. A performance, perhaps? Suddenly, a name pierced through my reverie. All real property, specifically the estate located at 1422 Lakeview Drive, known as Lakeview Haven, my breath caught. Our home. The one we had built together, brick by brick, memory by memory. Mr. Sterling continued, and all financial assets, including but not limited to, investment portfolios, stocks, bonds, and various bank accounts, totaling approximately $33 million, $33 million, are hereby bequeathed in their entirety to my sole heir, Serena Vance Fitzgerald. The words struck me like a physical blow. 33 million. Our home. Everything. To Serena. Just like that. I gasped, a small, involuntary sound that was immediately swallowed by the quiet. Serena, however, barely flinched. A flicker of something, triumph? Crossed her features, quickly masked. Jacob's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. He shot a quick, congratulatory glance at his wife. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat again, drawing my attention back. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, as the former spouse of the deceased, is provided with an annual stipend of $12,000, payable monthly, for her personal upkeep. $12,000. A pittance. Enough to keep me from utter destitution, perhaps, but certainly not to live comfortably, not after the life Robert and I had built. It was a cruel joke. Robert, my loving Robert, who had adored me, who had always insisted I want for nothing, had left me with less than a modest pension. It made no sense. It violated every fiber of our shared history. My face must have been a mask of shock and bewilderment. I wanted to ask questions, to demand an explanation, but the words were stuck in my throat, choked by a sudden, overwhelming wave of shame and betrayal. How could he? How could Robert do this to me? Was our 50 years together, our unwavering love, worth so little? Serena, however, was already speaking. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That's quite clear. I appreciate your promptness. Her voice was smooth, almost serene. Too serene. She didn't even glance at me, didn't acknowledge the devastating blow I had just received. It was as if I wasn't even in the room. Jacob, ever the opportunist, added, "Yes, Mr. Sterling. We'll need to discuss the timelines for transferring assets, naturally." Mr. Sterling nodded, his gaze briefly meeting mine. For a split second, I thought I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of pity, perhaps, or something deeper, unreadable. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual professional mask. "Of course, Mr. Fitzgerald. My office will be in touch with all necessary details." The meeting concluded. Serena and Jacob stood, their movements confident, their victory palpable. Serena finally turned to me, her expression a mix of feigned sympathy and barely contained impatience. "Mother, are you all right? You look a bit pale." The words were hollow, a performative gesture. I couldn't bring myself to speak. My throat felt constricted, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I merely nodded, gathering what little dignity I had left, and pushed myself up from the sofa. My legs felt like jelly. Each step was an effort. As I walked out of Mr. Sterling's office, the bustling city outside seemed to mock my inner turmoil. The vibrant life, the hurried footsteps, the chatter, it all felt distant, irrelevant. My world had just crumbled, reduced to dust by a few cold words on a piece of paper. And my own daughter, the very person I had nurtured and loved, stood by, a silent, gleeful accomplice to my ruin. The question of why echoed louder now, a desperate, aching plea for understanding that remained unanswered. The morning light, usually a gentle friend, felt like an interrogation lamp. It streamed through the large kitchen windows of Lakeview Haven, illuminating every dust motes in the air, every stark corner of the room that no longer felt like mine. I stood by the counter, a relic in my own home, trying to warm a teacup with shaking hands. The familiar scent of coffee brewing, a ritual Robert and I had shared for decades, was now tainted by an acrid bitterness. Serena and Jacob were already seated at the polished oak table, not speaking, but radiating an air of proprietorship that made my stomach churn. I cleared my throat, attempting to break the suffocating silence. "I thought I'd make some toast. And perhaps some scrambled eggs?" My voice sounded thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing even to my own ears. Serena looked up from her phone, her perfectly manicured hand pausing mid-scroll. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a chilling glint. "Mother, don't trouble yourself. Jacob and I have already had breakfast. And to be frank, the kitchen will need to be thoroughly cleaned and prepped for the estate agents. They're coming by this afternoon." Estate agents. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My home. Being prepared for sale. My heart, already a bruised and tender thing, twisted with a fresh wave of pain. Jacob finally spoke, his tone annoyingly reasonable. "Eleanor, we understand this is difficult for you. But the will is quite clear. This property is now ours. And as much as we value sentiment, we also have to consider the practicalities. Maintaining a property of this size, with its associated taxes and upkeep, is a considerable expense. Especially with the market as it is." He gestured vaguely around the spacious kitchen, as if it were a burden, not a sanctuary. "But where am I to go?" I managed, the question a desperate plea. Serena set her phone down with a soft click. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mother, we discussed this yesterday, didn't we? Mr. Sterling outlined your annual stipend. It's certainly enough for a small apartment, perhaps a nice assisted living facility. There are many excellent options for seniors these days. You could even look at some charming places out of state, where the cost of living is lower." My mind reeled. Assisted living? Out of state? This wasn't a suggestion, it was an eviction notice, delivered with the polite ruthlessness of a corporate memo. My home, my life, dismissed as an expense. "This is still my home, Serena," I whispered, finding a sliver of courage. 50 years, I've lived here. I raised you here." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped Serena's lips. "It was your home, Mother. now it's ours. And frankly, with all due respect, you're simply not contributing anymore. You're a liability. We need to streamline. You're useless now. Find another place to die. The words hit me harder than any physical blow. Useless. There it was again, delivered with such cold, clinical precision. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the frantic pounding of blood in my ears. I stared at her, this woman I had carried, nurtured, loved beyond measure. The daughter who, in one fell swoop, had stripped me of my dignity, my security, and my very sense of purpose. My eyes burned, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing my tears. Not now. Not ever again. A strange resolve began to solidify within me, an icy core forming where my grief had once been. I would not beg. I would not plead. I turned away from them, walking with as much composure as I could muster towards the back hall. My small, battered suitcase, packed hastily the night before, stood by the door. It contained a few changes of clothes, Robert's worn photograph from our wedding day, and a small, velvet-lined jewelry box holding my mother's locket and Robert's old pocket watch. These were my treasures, the tangible remnants of a life that felt brutally severed. As I reached the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, I paused. I glanced back at the grand living room, the Persian rug Robert had bought me in Persia, the Steinway piano where Serena had once practiced her scales, the large bay window overlooking the lake. Every object held a story, a whisper of a life lived fully, lovingly. Now, it all felt tainted, stripped of its warmth, awaiting the cold scrutiny of strangers. Serena and Jacob remained at the table, their backs to me, already discussing future plans, their voices low and conspiratorial. They didn't even look up. They were already moving on. I pulled open the door. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks. A yellow taxi was waiting in the driveway, its engine idling. As I stepped out, I took one last, lingering look at Lakeview Haven. The stately facade, the perfectly manicured gardens, the shimmering lake beyond. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But its beauty was now a cruel mockery, a symbol of everything I had lost. A tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down my cheek. But it wasn't just sorrow. There was a spark within it, a nascent ember of something fierce and determined. I wouldn't die. I wouldn't be useless. Robert, my dear, complex Robert, you couldn't have abandoned me like this. There had to be more. And I, Eleanor Vance, was going to find out what it was. The taxi pulled away, carrying me further and further from the only home I'd ever known, but closer, perhaps, to a truth I had yet to uncover. The taxi pulled up to a modest, two-story house nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street in the older part of town. Unlike the sprawling grandeur of Lakeview Haven, this home exuded a cozy, slightly cluttered warmth. Its porch swing swayed gently in the breeze, and pots of late-blooming marigolds adorned the steps. This was Melissa Carver's house, and for now, it was my refuge. Mel, as I affectionately called her, was waiting on the porch, her usually robust frame softened by concern. Her auburn hair, now streaked generously with silver, was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her kind eyes, usually brimming with humor, were clouded with worry. She rushed down the steps as I fumbled with the taxi door, her arms immediately enveloping me in a tight, comforting hug. "Eleanor, you poor thing," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Come inside, come inside. You look absolutely frozen." Her house smelled of cinnamon and old books, a comforting scent that immediately began to thaw the icy grip of despair around my heart. Mel led me to her small, but impeccably clean guest room. It was simply furnished, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a single window overlooking a small, riotously colorful garden. It felt like a haven after the sterile grandeur I had just left. "Let's get you settled," Mel said, her hands gently pushing me towards the armchair. "I've put on a pot of chamomile tea. And I've got some of my famous lemon bars. You need something warm inside you." As I sipped the hot tea, its warmth spreading through me, the dam finally broke. The carefully constructed facade of composure I had maintained for Serena and Jacob crumbled, and the tears, hot and bitter, finally streamed down my face. I recounted the brutal events of the past 24 hours, the Will's cruel terms, Serena's icy pronouncements, Jacob's smirking complicity. Every word was a fresh wound, a raw, aching betrayal. Mel listened patiently, her hand resting gently on my arm, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. When I finished, a ragged sob catching in my throat, she finally spoke, her voice laced with indignation. That ungrateful, selfish witch. After everything you and Robert did for her? I swear, Eleanor, sometimes I don't recognize the girl we helped raise. She shook her head, a deep frown etched on her brow. But Robert. I just can't fathom it. He adored you, Eleanor. Absolutely adored you. He wouldn't have left you in the lurch like that. It just doesn't make sense. Are you absolutely certain you heard everything correctly? Mel's question, though born of genuine concern, struck a chord within me. Did I hear everything correctly? My mind had been so clouded with grief, so stunned by the sheer audacity of Serena's cruelty, that I had barely processed the legal jargon. I remembered Mr. Sterling's flat tone, the quick succession of financial terms, Serena's triumphant expression. Had I missed something? Was it possible? I thought back to Robert. My Robert. He was not a cruel man. He was, if anything, overly protective, fiercely loyal. He had always made sure I had everything I needed, everything I desired. From the small trinkets he'd bring back from business trips to the grand gestures like rebuilding our entire sunroom because I once mentioned the light wasn't quite right. To imagine him intentionally leaving me destitute, subject to the whims of our avaricious daughter, was simply unthinkable. It felt like a betrayal of his very character. I don't know, Mel, I confessed, the doubt a tiny, unsettling knot in my stomach. I was so numb. It was like listening to someone else's life being dissected. Serena and Jacob were so quick to take over, so smug. Mel's gaze softened. Well, perhaps you just need some rest, dear. Things always look clearer in the morning. We'll figure it out. Despite her comforting words, the seed of doubt she had planted began to sprout. Robert, with all his business acumen, had always been meticulous. He rarely left anything to chance. He had a reputation for foresight, for planning multiple steps ahead. Could he have genuinely overlooked my welfare? Or, could he have anticipated something like this? Could he have set a trap? I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It sounded too much like a cheap novel. But then again, the sheer malice of Serena's actions felt ripped from one. Just as the early evening shadows began to stretch across Mel's cozy living room, her landline rang, its old-fashioned chime startling us both. Mel glanced at the caller ID, then frowned. It's Mr. Sterling's office, she announced, handing the phone to me. Her eyebrows rose in question. I took the receiver, my heart giving an involuntary lurch. Hello? Mrs. Vance? It was Mr. Sterling's voice, crisp and professional, yet with an undertone I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity, not exactly. More like a subtle current of amusement? Or anticipation. My apologies for disturbing you, but there's a small matter regarding Mr. Vance's estate I need to discuss with you. Privately, if you wouldn't mind. Just you. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning, say, 10 o'clock? I exchanged a puzzled glance with Mel. Privately? I repeated, the word hanging in the air. Without Serena? A beat of silence. Then, Mr. Sterling's voice, a touch softer now, with that same unreadable note. Yes, Mrs. Vance. Especially without Serena. 10 o'clock? Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Yes, I'll be there. As I hung up, Mel looked at me, her eyes wide. What was that about? Why just you? I shook my head, a strange mixture of apprehension and a nascent hope stirring within me. I don't know, Mel. But something tells me, something isn't quite right. Something tells me Robert wasn't quite finished writing his will after all. The knot of doubt tightened, but this time it was accompanied by a flicker of fierce curiosity. I would go. And I would listen. My story, I realized, was about to take a very unexpected turn. The walk to Mr. Sterling's office felt different this time. The anxiety was still a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now laced with a potent cocktail of curiosity and a stubborn flicker of hope. Mel had insisted on driving me, her concern etched across her face. Just in case, she'd said, her eyes meaningfully flicking towards the injustice of my situation. I'd walked into that office 2 days ago a broken woman. Today, I carried a fragile but growing conviction that something was amiss. Mr. Sterling's receptionist, a prim woman with spectacles perched on her nose, greeted me with a polite, almost deferential nod. She led me directly into his private office. The room was the same, yet it felt different. The air was less charged, the atmosphere almost serene. Mr. Sterling rose from behind his large mahogany desk, offering me a seat in one of the comfortable armchairs facing him. He did not offer condolences, nor did he rush to business. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice calm, measured. "How are you holding up?" I stiffened slightly, a flash of irritation. "Given the circumstances, Mr. Sterling, I'd say I'm doing as well as can be expected. I'm currently residing with a friend, having been encouraged to vacate my home." I tried to keep my voice even, but a hint of bitterness crept in. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. He regarded me with an unsettling intensity, a look that seemed to probe beyond my words, searching for something deeper. "Yes, I heard as much," he said, a peculiar, almost imperceptible curve playing on his lips. It wasn't a smile of mirth, but something more complex, knowing, perhaps even a touch of veiled satisfaction. "And how did you find that experience, Mrs. Vance?" His line of questioning felt intrusive, almost cruel. Was he enjoying my discomfort? Was this some legal formality I was unaware of? It was humiliating, Mr. Sterling. To be cast out of the home I shared with my husband for 50 years, by my own daughter, barely a week after his funeral. It was a profound betrayal. My voice was stronger now, tinged with the steel that had begun to form within me. He nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. "Indeed. Profound betrayal." He paused, then picked up a slim file from his desk. It was unmarked. "And what are your thoughts on Mr. Vance's will, as it was presented to you on Tuesday?" "My thoughts?" I echoed, a short, bitter laugh escaping me. "My thoughts are that Robert, the man I loved and trusted for half a century, somehow, inexplicably, abandoned me in his death. That he left everything to our daughter, knowing her character, knowing her potential for avarice. It makes no sense to me, Mr. Sterling. None at all." He continued to watch me, that peculiar expression still on his face. He seemed to be savoring the moment, drawing it out, almost as if he were waiting for something. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Just as I was about to demand an explanation, the door to the office opened without a knock. Serena stood there, immaculate in a tailored suit, her face a mask of indignation. Jacob was right behind her, his own expression a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. "Mr. Sterling," Serena began, her voice sharp, "what is the meaning of this? You summoned Mother here without informing us? And you specifically asked us not to attend. We have every right to be present for any discussions concerning my father's estate." Her eyes, cold and hard, flicked to me, a silent accusation in their depths. Mr. Sterling, however, remained unfazed. He merely gestured towards 2 empty chairs. "Please, Serena, Jacob. Do come in. Take a seat. You're precisely who I was expecting, actually." Serena and Jacob exchanged a quick, bewildered glance, then reluctantly took their seats, radiating hostility. Serena glared at me, as if I had orchestrated this clandestine meeting. I met her gaze, no longer intimidated. I had nothing more to lose. Mr. Sterling closed the unmarked file and placed it neatly on his desk. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes moving from Serena to Jacob, then finally resting on me. That strange, almost mischievous curve returned to his lips, deepening into a knowing smile. "Miss Vance Fitzgerald," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, a subtle undercurrent of something that might have been amusement, "and Mr. Fitzgerald. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding Mr. Vance's last wishes. A rather significant one, in fact." Serena's eyebrows shot up. "Misunderstanding? What are you talking about, Mr. Sterling?" "The will was read, the terms were explicit. Everything is ours. Mother received her stipend. There's nothing more to discuss." Mr. Sterling's smile widened, a genuinely knowing smile now, one that spoke of secrets held and strategies deployed. He picked up the first copy of the will that had been read days ago, then set it down. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached into a locked drawer in his desk. From it, he retrieved another, identical-looking document, but this one bound with a thick, red ribbon. He placed it squarely between himself and Serena, tapping it lightly with a perfectly manicured finger. Then, his eyes, alight with an almost theatrical flare, fixed directly on Serena. The smile lingered, brimming with a quiet, dangerous mirth. And with a voice that held a hint of a chuckle, he delivered the devastating line, the one that promised to unravel everything. "Did you, by any chance, Miss Vance Fitzgerald," he said, his voice dripping with ironic politeness, "or you, Mr. Fitzgerald, actually read the will? All of it? Or did you just skim the highlights?" Serena's face, which had been a picture of smug confidence moments before, drained of all color. Her jaw went slack. Jacob, ever the astute one, leaned forward, a cold dread replacing his earlier arrogance. The air in the room crackled. The game, it seemed, was only just beginning. Serena's face had gone from confident flush to an ashen mask. Jacob, usually so composed, shifted uneasily in his chair, his eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Mr. Sterling with growing suspicion. I watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over me, as if I were observing a scene in a play rather than living my own life. That tiny spark of hope from earlier was now a flickering flame, defying the storm. Mr. Sterling, however, seemed to relish the unfolding drama. He picked up the red ribbon document, not the first copy that had been read, but a second, thicker one. "This, Miss Vance Fitzgerald, is the complete and unredacted last will and testament of Robert Vance. The document I read on Tuesday contained only the primary bequests, as is standard practice for initial family meetings, focusing on asset distribution. However," he paused, allowing the word to hang in the air, "Mr. Vance, with his characteristic foresight, included several supplemental clauses. Clauses that I was instructed to reveal only under specific circumstances." He opened the document, the rustle of pages like a prelude to a verdict. His gaze, still holding that peculiar glint, settled on Serena. "Let us start with Lakeview Haven, shall we?" Serena's eyes darted between me and the lawyer. "What about it?" "It's mine. The deed is being processed as we speak." Her voice was tight, a tremor betraying her carefully constructed composure. Mr. Sterling smiled, a predatory gleam now in his eyes. "Indeed. The title passes to you, Miss Vance Fitzgerald. Upon the death of my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance." He read slowly, deliberately, each word a hammer blow. "The property, known as Lakeview Haven, located at 1422 Lakeview Drive, is bequeathed in full and unquestionable lifetime tenancy to my beloved wife, Eleanor Vance. She shall have exclusive and unimpeded right of residency and full access to all amenities, utilities, and grounds for the entirety of her natural life. The legal title shall transfer to Serena Vance Fitzgerald only upon Mrs. Eleanor Vance's passing." A gasp escaped me. My heart lurched, a dizzying mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Lifetime tenancy. It was mine. My home was still mine. Serena, however, went utterly rigid. What? That's impossible. You didn't read that part, she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. I read the primary bequest regarding title transfer, Miss Vance Fitzgerald, Mr. Sterling replied coolly, not missing a beat. But as per your father's explicit instructions, certain conditions were to be disclosed only when necessary. And frankly, your recent actions have made it quite necessary. He then turned to Jacob, a sly challenge in his gaze. And now, for the matter of the $33 million. Mr. Fitzgerald, I believe you were already calculating investment strategies for this sum? Jacob, his face now a sickly shade of green, simply stared. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice resonating with newfound authority. All remaining liquid assets, comprising approximately $33 million, shall form the Eleanor Vance Benevolent Fund. My daughter, Serena Vance Fitzgerald, is hereby appointed as the fiduciary trustee of this fund. Serena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A flicker of hope returned to her eyes. Fiduciary trustee? So, it's still mine to manage. I told you, Mother, you get an allowance. Her voice, regaining some of its smugness, turned sharp. Mr. Sterling's smile, however, only deepened. Not quite, Miss Vance Fitzgerald. The terms of the trust are quite specific. And rather, comprehensive. As fiduciary trustee, you are legally and morally obligated to ensure Mrs. Eleanor Vance's complete comfort, medical care, financial security for all her needs and desires, and to provide her with a generous monthly stipend, as determined by Mrs. Vance herself, subject to the fund's capacity. You are also required to provide Mrs. Vance and an independent auditor with quarterly financial reports, detailing every expenditure and investment. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Serena was not the owner of the money, she was merely its manager, bound by strict legal obligations to me. And I, the supposed useless one, held the purse strings, or rather, the power to demand them. But Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He tapped the document again, his eyes now cold, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. And this, Miss Vance Fitzgerald, is the most crucial clause. The one Robert Vance insisted on. The one designed to protect his beloved wife from any unforeseen circumstances. He looked pointedly at Serena and Jacob. In the event that Serena Vance Fitzgerald fails to fulfill her duties as trustee to ensure Eleanor Vance's benevolent welfare, or in the event of her refusal to act as fiduciary trustee, or should Eleanor Vance be compelled to vacate Lakeview Haven due to Serena's actions, then the entirety of the Eleanor Vance Benevolent Fund, including the property Lakeview Haven, shall irrevocably transfer to the Golden Years of America Foundation. Furthermore, in such an instance, Serena Vance Fitzgerald shall forfeit all rights to Robert Vance's estate, save for a symbolic sum of $100,000, designated solely for the expenses of Robert Vance's funeral arrangements and a modest wreath. The silence that followed was absolute, punctuated only by Serena's ragged breathing. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with horror. Jacob looked as though he had been struck. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and drawn. $33 million. Gone. The house. Gone. All because of her greed, her cruelty. Serena found her voice, a raw, strangled sound. No. This is a trick. A forgery. It can't be. She sprang up, knocking her chair backward, her eyes wild. You tricked us. You let us believe, you let me believe. Mr. Sterling, however, remained utterly unperturbed. He calmly pushed a button on his intercom. Ms. Jenkins, please bring in the notarized copies of Mr. Vance's will, along with the authenticated video recording of its signing and your testimony as a witness. A few moments later, Ms. Jenkins entered, carrying a heavy folder and a small tablet. She placed them on the desk. Mr. Sterling played a short video clip. There was Robert, looking frail but determined, signing the red ribbon document, his voice clear as he affirmed his wishes. Then, he looked directly into the camera, a faint, knowing smile on his face, a twinkle in his eye, and said, "For Eleanor. She'll know what to do." Serena crumpled back into her chair, defeated, her chest heaving. Jacob, slumped beside her, ran a hand over his face, his dreams of grandeur shattering around him. As for me? The initial shock gave way to a wave of profound emotion. Tears welled up in my eyes, but these were tears of revelation, not sorrow. Robert. My complicated, brilliant Robert. He hadn't abandoned me. He had protected me. Not just from destitution, but from Serena's rapaciousness. He had laid a trap, a meticulously crafted legal snare, knowing exactly how she would react, knowing exactly what she would attempt. And in doing so, he had given me back not just my home and my financial security, but something far more precious, my dignity, my power, and a reason to fight. The quiet, observant Eleanor Vance was dead. A new woman, armed with knowledge and a burgeoning strength, was being born. The game was indeed just beginning, and this time, I held the winning hand. The silence in Mr. Sterling's office was thicker than before, heavy with the weight of shattered ambitions and nascent power. Serena sat utterly defeated, her face a blotchy, tear-streaked mess, her usual composure utterly demolished. Jacob, beside her, looked like a man who had just seen his entire future evaporate, his carefully constructed edifice of wealth reduced to dust. I, Eleanor, watched them, a strange, quiet calm settling over me. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. Mr. Sterling, ever the professional, allowed the silence to linger for a moment longer, letting the full gravity of the situation sink in. Then, he spoke, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The terms are clear. The will is legally sound, meticulously drafted, and witnessed. There is no loophole. The choice, Miss Vance Fitzgerald, is yours. Either fulfill your fiduciary duties to your mother, ensuring her welfare as per the will's explicit instructions, or the entire fund, including the property, transfers to the Golden Years of America Foundation. Effective immediately. And you, and Mr. Fitzgerald, will be left with a symbolic sum that wouldn't cover half your monthly expenses. Serena visibly flinched. The idea of losing everything, of having to rebuild from scratch, was clearly a terrifying prospect for her. Her eyes, red and swollen, flickered to me, and for the first time, I saw not contempt, but fear. Genuine, raw fear. She slowly pushed herself up from the chair, her movements stiff, almost robotic. She took a step towards me, then another, until she was directly in front of my chair. She hesitated, swallowed hard, then sank to her knees. "Mother," she choked out, her voice raspy, unfamiliar. "Mother, I am so sorry. Please. Please forgive me." Her head bowed, her carefully styled hair falling around her face, hiding her expression. But her shoulders shook with what could have been sobs. Jacob, recovering slightly, quickly joined her, kneeling awkwardly beside his wife. "Eleanor," he said, his voice unusually soft, almost pleading. We made a terrible mistake. We were grieving. Confused. It was a lapse in judgment. Please, you must believe us. We want to do right by you. Always have." I looked down at them, two figures of desperate contrition on the expensive Persian rug. Their words, however, rang hollow. The performance was too sudden, too perfectly timed with the revelation of their ruin. Their apologies were not for the pain they had inflicted, but for the consequences they now faced. "Get up, both of you," I said, my voice steady, surprisingly strong. The fragility was gone. In its place, a quiet authority had bloomed. "Your apologies are noted, Serena." "Jacob." But I doubt their sincerity. They scrambled to their feet, looking chastened. "You called me useless," I continued, my gaze fixed on Serena. "You told me to find another place to die. You wanted me gone, out of your way, so you could plunder my husband's legacy." The words were not delivered with anger, but with a quiet, devastating truth. Do you truly believe a mere apology can erase that? Serena started to speak, to offer another platitude, but I held up a hand, silencing her. No. Not now. We will adhere to the will, Serena. Every single clause. You will provide me with quarterly reports, audited by an independent firm. You will ensure my comfort, my health, and my financial security. And you will do so with respect, or you will lose everything. Is that understood? Her eyes, still wide with shock, met mine. She nodded, slowly. Yes, Mother. Understood. Good, I said, standing up. My legs felt stronger now, my posture straighter. Mr. Sterling, please ensure all necessary legal documents are prepared to initiate the trust and its oversight. I will need full access to all banking records and an immediate accounting of the fund's current status. Mr. Sterling smiled, a genuine, approving smile this time. Consider it done, Mrs. Vance. I will also personally oversee the transition and ensure all compliance. He even offered me a slight bow. As we walked out of the office, the dynamic was completely reversed. Serena and Jacob trailed behind me, subdued and anxious, while I walked with a newfound sense of purpose. Mel, who had been waiting outside, rushed forward, her face a mixture of concern and anticipation. I simply offered her a small, triumphant smile. Let's go home, Mel, I said, the words tasting sweet on my tongue. Let's go home. The drive back to Lakeview Haven was surreal. The house, which I had left with such despair, now loomed before me, a symbol of my reclaimed sovereignty. Yet, as I stepped out of the car, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a lingering sense of unease. The house felt different. It was still beautiful, majestic, but the warmth was gone. It felt tainted by Serena's greed, by the knowledge of what she had tried to do. Serena and Jacob were already there, having driven ahead. They stood by the front door, looking like lost children, their earlier hostility replaced by a forced deference. Mother, Serena said, her voice strained. We've already cleared out your old room. It's ready for you. I looked at her, then at the house. This was not merely about returning to a physical space. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity. Robert had given me a weapon, a shield. But I knew this wasn't over. The battle for my home, for my dignity, might have been won, but the war for my peace of mind, and perhaps for understanding Robert's true intentions, was only just beginning. As I stepped across the threshold, into the house that was once again mine, I felt a thrill that was both exhilarating and sobering. Serena's eyes, watching me, were still filled with a chilling, barely suppressed resentment. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, but the animosity remained. And deep inside, I knew Robert's elaborate plan might hold even more secrets. Secrets that I, Eleanor Vance, was now uniquely positioned to uncover. I was back, but I was not the same woman who had left. Not anymore. The first few weeks back at Lakeview Haven were a masterclass in passive aggression. Serena, now my reluctant caretaker and financial manager, wore her subservience like an ill-fitting coat, constantly chafing at the seams. She was a ghost in her own scheme, haunting the hallways of the house she thought she'd won, her face a perpetual mask of strained politeness. I, on the other hand, was discovering a part of myself I never knew existed. The quiet, accommodating Eleanor had been replaced by a woman who understood the nuances of power. Robert had not just given me security, he had given me a role, and I was determined to play it to perfection. My days took on a new structure. Each morning, I would sit in Robert's study, the scent of old leather and his faint, lingering cologne a comforting presence. With Mr. Sterling's guidance, I began to learn about finance, about trusts and investments. I started requesting daily account summaries from Serena, an act that clearly infuriated her. Mother, a daily report is highly unusual, she'd said the first time, her voice tight. Is it? I'd replied, not looking up from a prospectus. Well, I find it highly reassuring. Please have it on my desk by 9 a.m. every morning. Along with my coffee. 2 sugars, please. The small acts of defiance were constant. One evening, I found the thermostat turned down to a frigid 60 degrees. I simply called Serena from my room. Serena, dear, I seem to be feeling a chill. Could you be a dear and adjust the heat? My old bones, you know. The sound of her stomping to the thermostat was music to my ears. Another time, the groceries she bought were suspiciously close to their expiration date. I made a point of going through the refrigerator with her, item by item. Oh, dear, this milk goes off tomorrow. And this chicken, it looks a little pale, don't you think? Perhaps we should invest in fresher produce. The fund can certainly afford it, wouldn't you agree? Each interaction was a subtle reminder of the new order. I was no longer the frail, grieving widow. I was the beneficiary, the queen of this house, and she was the trustee, bound by law to serve my interests. It was a cruel game, perhaps, but it was one she had started. I was merely finishing it, using the rules Robert had so cleverly laid out. Jacob, for his part, made himself scarce. He'd leave early for work and return late, his face a grim, stony mask. The easy camaraderie between him and Serena had vanished, replaced by clipped, tense exchanges I'd sometimes overhear from the other room. Their shared dream had turned into a shared prison, and I was their warden. One rainy afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive atmosphere, I began to sort through Robert's personal effects in the study, things Serena had callously overlooked in her haste to take inventory of his financial assets. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a connection to the man I had loved and, I now realized, barely understood. In the bottom drawer of his large oak desk, beneath a stack of old tax returns, I found them, a series of worn, leather-bound journals. Robert's handwriting, a familiar, elegant script, filled the pages. I had never known he kept a diary. He was a private man, and I had always respected that. But now, it felt like an invitation, a message from beyond the grave. I opened the first one, dated decades ago, when he was just starting his business. The entries were a fascinating mix of business strategies, market observations, and surprisingly tender reflections on our life together. He wrote about my smile, about the first dinner I ever cooked for him, about his pride the day Serena was born. A wave of love and sorrow washed over me. This was the man I knew. But as I delved deeper, into journals from his middle years, the tone began to shift. The entries became more cryptic. He mentioned names I didn't recognize, business deals that sounded edgy. He wrote of necessary risks and unconventional partnerships. One entry, in particular, sent a chill down my spine. October 14, 1998. Met with Burke today. The man is a shark, but a necessary one. The deal is done. The initial capital is secured. It's not clean, I know that. But it will build a foundation for us, for Serena. One day, I will make it right. One day, I will wash it clean and protect Eleanor from the stain. Burke. The name was unfamiliar, but the context was unnerving. Not clean. Protect Eleanor from the stain. What stain? What had Robert done? I felt a growing unease. The $33 million, was it all from his legitimate businesses? Or was this benevolent fund a form of penance? Was Robert's intricate will not just a trap for Serena, but a shield for me? A way to legitimize money that had a questionable origin? The thought was deeply unsettling. It recast our entire life in a different light. The beautiful house, the lavish vacations, Serena's expensive education, were they all built on a foundation of something dark, something Robert had hidden from me all these years? My quiet power struggle with Serena suddenly felt trivial, a petty domestic squabble in the face of a much larger, more dangerous mystery. I was no longer just the queen of the house. I was the keeper of Robert's secrets. And I had a sinking feeling that the past was not as buried as he might have hoped. The stain he had tried to wash away was perhaps, only now, beginning to surface. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The discovery of Robert's journals changed everything. My days were no longer about the quiet satisfaction of putting Serena in her place. They were a feverish, clandestine quest for the truth. While she and Jacob moved through the house like resentful specters, I spent hours locked in the study, poring over the brittle pages, piecing together a version of my husband I had never known. His entries were a labyrinth of half-truths and veiled confessions. He never spelled out the nature of his unconventional partnerships, but the language he used was telling. Words like leverage, silent partners, and creative accounting appeared with unsettling frequency. He wrote of men who operated in the gray areas of business, men who valued discretion and results above all else. The name Burke, Calvin Burke, I later deduced from a cryptic note about a CB merger, appeared repeatedly, always associated with high-risk, high-reward ventures that Robert seemed both thrilled and terrified by. One passage, scribbled late at night, was particularly haunting. March 2, 2003. Eleanor asked me today if I was happy. I told her, of course. I have her, I have Serena, I have this beautiful life we've built. And it's true. But there's a cost. A weight. This fortune, this empire, it has deep, tangled roots. I pray she never has to see them. I've spent years building walls around her, around our life, to keep the rot out. But sometimes, at night, I can hear it scratching. The rot. The stain. My Robert, the man I had believed to be a pillar of integrity, had lived a double life. He had built me a gilded cage, beautiful and secure, but its foundations were sunk in something murky, something he was deeply ashamed of. The $33 million wasn't just a fortune, it was a burden, a legacy of secrets he had passed on to me. I began to see his will in a new light. It wasn't just about controlling Serena, it was about controlling the money. By creating the Eleanor Vance Benevolent Fund and making me its ultimate arbiter, he had placed the fortune in a kind of legal quarantine. It was protected, insulated, and under the stewardship of the one person he trusted implicitly, me. He was relying on my inherent goodness, my moral compass, to manage a fortune that was morally compromised. The thought was both a profound honor and a terrifying responsibility. My search through his belongings became more focused. I was no longer just reminiscing, I was investigating. In the back of his closet, tucked away in an old shoebox filled with cufflinks and tie clips, I found a small, ornate brass key. It was a skeleton key, old-fashioned, and it didn't fit any of the doors or chests in the house that I knew of. Taped to its shaft was a tiny, folded piece of paper. On it, in Robert's handwriting, was a single phrase, "Where the heart of the house once beat." The heart of the house. What could that mean? I thought of the living room, the kitchen, our bedroom. Nothing seemed to fit. Days turned into a week. My obsession with the journals and the key grew, creating a distance even from Mel, who would call to check on me. I'd offer her vague assurances, unable to voice the fears that were taking root in my heart. Then, one evening, as I sat in the study, staring into the cold, dark fireplace, it struck me. The original house plans, which Robert had framed and hung in the hallway, showed a large, central brick fireplace in this very room. When we renovated 20 years ago, Robert had insisted on replacing it with a more modern, efficient gas insert. He'd overseen the construction himself, being unusually particular about the stonework. The heart of the house once beat. The fireplace. The hearth. My own heart began to pound. After Serena and Jacob had retired to their rooms, their resentful silence a familiar backdrop to my evenings, I went to work. Armed with a fireplace poker and a heavy-duty flashlight, I examined the new stonework. It was seamless, perfect. But Robert was a man of details. I ran my fingers over every stone, every seam of mortar. And then I found it. A single stone, slightly to the left of the gas insert, that felt different. It wasn't loose, but it had a different texture, a slightly different give when I pushed on it. I inserted the tip of the poker into the fine seam around it and pried. With a low groan of scraping stone, the block moved. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. A hidden safe. And in the center of the safe door was a keyhole, ornate and old, a perfect match for the brass key in my pocket. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and turned. With a soft, satisfying click, the heavy steel door swung open. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the contents. It wasn't cash or gold. It was a single, large manila envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in Robert's unmistakable script, was a single word, Eleanor. I took the envelope, my breath catching in my throat. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the truth he had hidden away in the heart of our home. I didn't know if I was ready for what was inside, but I knew I had to open it. Robert's carefully constructed walls were finally coming down, and I was about to see what lay behind them. And I had the terrible feeling that I wasn't the only one who might be looking for it. Before I could open the envelope, a sound from the front of the house made me freeze. It was the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, slow and deliberate, not the familiar purr of Jacob's sedan or Serena's SUV. It was followed by the heavy thud of a car door closing. My heart leaped into my throat. It was nearly midnight. We weren't expecting anyone. I quickly pushed the stone back into place, the heavy envelope clutched in my hand, and turned off the flashlight. My first instinct was to hide. But where? The study door was closed, but offered little protection. Then I remembered the heavy velvet curtains that flanked the bay window. I slipped behind them, my back pressed against the cold glass, my body shrouded in darkness. Through a small gap, I could see the hallway, dimly lit by a single night light. The doorbell rang, a shrill, piercing sound that shattered the late-night silence. It rang again, more insistent this time, followed by a heavy, impatient knock on the solid oak door. I heard movement upstairs. Serena's door creaked open. "Jacob? Are you expecting someone?" Her voice was a hushed, annoyed whisper. "No," came his muffled reply. "Stay here." I heard Jacob's heavy footsteps on the grand staircase. He switched on the main hall light, flooding the area with a sudden, harsh brightness. He approached the door, his silhouette visible through the frosted glass panels. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice laced with suspicion. A low, gravelly voice answered from the other side. "We're looking for Robert Vance. We have some unfinished business to discuss." Jacob's posture stiffened. "Robert Vance passed away over a month ago. You have the wrong house." "No," the voice replied, a chilling certainty in its tone. "I don't think we do. We know he's gone. We're here to talk to his heir. The one who inherited the D Foundation." My blood ran cold. They knew. They knew about the money. Jacob hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I think you should leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police." There was a short, humorless laugh from outside. "You can do that. But I don't think you want the kind of attention that brings. Not with what we know. Just open the door, Fitzgerald. Let's be civilized." I could see the conflict warring on Jacob's face. He was in over his head. After a tense moment, with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house, he unlocked the door and opened it a few inches. Two men stood on the porch, their large frames silhouetted against the night. The one who had spoken was older, with a weathered face and cold, intelligent eyes. He was dressed in an expensive-looking overcoat, but there was a roughness about him, a predatory stillness that a tailor couldn't hide. The other man was younger, bigger, a silent mountain of muscle who stood slightly behind him, his gaze sweeping the interior of the house with a professional, detached air. "Calvin Burke," the older man said, extending a hand that Jacob pointedly ignored. His smile was thin, reptilian. "And this is my associate. May we come in? It's a bit chilly out here." Burke. The name from Robert's journal. The shark. He was real. And he was here. Without waiting for an invitation, Burke pushed the door open and stepped inside, his associate following close behind. Jacob stumbled back, his face pale. "What do you want?" Jacob demanded, his voice strained. "What I'm owed," Burke said simply, his eyes scanning the opulent hallway, the grand staircase, the expensive art on the walls. "Robert and I had a long and profitable history. His sudden departure left a few accounts unbalanced. $33 million worth of unbalanced, to be precise." At that moment, Serena appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her silk robe, her face a mask of fear and confusion. "Jacob? Who are these men?" Burke's cold eyes shifted upwards, landing on Serena. He gave her a slow, appreciative once-over that made my skin crawl. "Ah, the heiress. And the trustee. How convenient. We were just discussing your father's legacy. He was a brilliant man. But not always forthcoming. He owed me, and others, a significant return on an early investment. An investment that, shall we say, provided the seed capital for all of this." He gestured around the hall. "We were content to let Robert manage it. But now that he's gone, we've come to collect. With interest. You have no claim." Serena's voice was sharp, a flash of her old arrogance returning. "The will is ironclad. Everything is in a trust, for my mother." Burke's smile widened. "Your mother?" "Yes. The old woman. Where is she?" "We'd much rather discuss this with the actual beneficiary. The one who holds the purse strings." Hidden behind the curtain, I clutched the heavy envelope to my chest. Its contents felt like a burning weight in my hands. Robert's premonitions, his fears about the rot, were no longer abstract. They were standing in my hallway. These were the men he had built his walls to keep out. And they had just broken through. The house, my sanctuary, my fortress, had become a trap. And I, holding the key to Robert's darkest secrets, was the prize. My quiet life had not just been a masquerade, it had been the calm before a storm I never knew was gathering. And that storm had just made landfall. The tension in the hallway was a living thing, coiling and tightening with every passing second. From my hiding place, I watched as Calvin Burke circled the grand foyer like a predator assessing its territory. Serena and Jacob stood frozen on the stairs, their faces pale masks of fear, their earlier bravado completely gone. They were out of their depth, swimmers caught in a riptide, and they knew it. "My mother is not well," Serena stammered, her voice thin and unconvincing. "She's sleeping. You can't disturb her." Burke let out a low chuckle, a sound like gravel grinding. "Oh, I think we can. You see, your father was a smart man, but he made one mistake. He kept records. Detailed ones. And while he may have hidden the money in your mother's name, the paper trail for its origins, well, that leads right back to us. A full IRS audit, a federal investigation, it would be very messy. For everyone. Especially for a grieving family that just inherited a fortune of, let's call it unverified income." The threat hung in the air, potent and undeniable. He was talking about blackmail, about leveraging Robert's past to destroy our future. Serena's face crumpled. She understood the implications perfectly. Her ambition, her entire world, was built on the foundation of that money. Tainted or not, she couldn't let it go. "What do you want?" Jacob finally asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's simple," Burke said, turning his cold gaze on him. "A transfer. A significant portion of the fund to an offshore account. A finder's fee, for our original investment. Let's say, $15 million. A clean break. We disappear, the records disappear, and you and the lovely Mrs. Fitzgerald are free to enjoy the rest of your inheritance. The old woman never has to know a thing." I felt a surge of cold fury. They were negotiating over my life, my security, right in front of me. And Serena. I could see the calculation in her eyes. 15 million was a steep price, but it would leave her with 18 million, free and clear of any threats. It was a deal she was clearly considering. To her, I was just a pawn, a temporary obstacle. And then, she did something that sealed her fate. Her eyes, filled with a desperate, cunning light, flickered towards the study. My mother, she's old, Serena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's frail. Sometimes she gets confused. Sometimes, she has accidents. My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just considering the deal. She was offering them a more permanent solution to the problem of Eleanor Vance. Get rid of me, and the trust's primary beneficiary would be gone. The legal complexities would be enormous, but with me out of the picture, she and Burke could carve up the fortune at their leisure. In that moment, I knew I had to act. My fear was still a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a white-hot, protective rage. This was my home. This was Robert's legacy. And I would not let these vultures tear it apart. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I clutched the manila envelope and stepped out from behind the curtain. That won't be necessary, Serena, I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden, shocked silence. 3 heads whipped around to face me. Serena's jaw dropped, her face a comical mask of horror. Jacob stumbled back a step, as if he'd seen a ghost. Calvin Burke, however, simply smiled, a slow, predatory spreading of his lips. Ah, he said softly. The Queen has entered the game. Eleanor Vance, I presume. We were just talking about you. I ignored him, my gaze locked on my daughter. An accident, Serena? Is that what you were planning? After everything, after all the second chances Roberts will afforded you, this is what you choose? Mother, I didn't mean. She stammered, but the lie was plain on her face. I held up the manila envelope. It doesn't matter what you meant. It only matters what Robert did. I turned my attention to Burke, my voice steady, imbued with a strength I didn't know I possessed. Mr. Burke. My husband mentioned you in his journals. He called you a shark. I see now he was being charitable. A jackal, perhaps, would be more accurate. Scavenging what you believe is yours. Burke's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then annoyance. Your husband was a very cautious man, Mrs. Vance. He kept his secrets well. But not well enough. Oh, I think he did, I said, breaking the wax seal on the envelope with a decisive crack. I pulled out a thick sheaf of papers and a small, leather-bound ledger. You see, Mr. Burke, you are right. My husband kept meticulous records. Not just of your illegal seed money, but of every transaction, every shell corporation, every laundered dollar that passed between you for the last 25 years. I held up the ledger. This is his personal accounting of it all. Names, dates, account numbers. A complete roadmap of your criminal enterprise. He called it his confession. I call it my insurance policy. Burke's face, for the first time, lost its smug composure. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed his features. His associate shifted, his hand moving subtly inside his jacket. But that's not all, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Robert knew you'd come one day. He knew you wouldn't let this go. So he prepared a final gift for you. I pulled out the last document from the envelope. It was a letter, addressed to me. I began to read aloud, my voice clear and unwavering. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the wolves are at the door. I am sorry for the secrets I kept, for the dark foundation upon which I built our beautiful life. I did it to protect you, a foolish man's rationale, I know now. The money in the fund is tainted, my love. It is the fruit of a poisoned tree. And now, you must be the one to decide its fate. I paused, looking at the stunned faces before me. He goes on, I said, my voice dropping slightly. The ledger contains all the proof the authorities will ever need. But there is a second copy, Mr. Burke. A digital one. It is held on a secure, encrypted server. If anything should happen to me, an accident, perhaps, or if I fail to enter a specific code every 24 hours, the entire contents of that server, including this ledger and a detailed signed confession from Robert, will be automatically sent to the FBI, the IRS, and the top 3 journalists at the New York Times. The first code was entered an hour ago. The clock, as they say, is ticking. The silence in the room was absolute. Burke stared at me, his cold eyes wide with disbelief, then dawning fury. He was trapped. Robert had reached out from the grave and sprung a final, perfect snare. The deal is this, Mr. Burke, I said, my voice like ice. You and your man will walk out that door. You will forget the name Vance. You will forget this house, this money. You will disappear. If I ever see you or hear from you again, I will stop entering the code. Am I clear? Burke's face was a thunderous mask of rage. He was a predator, cornered and outmaneuvered. He took a step forward, a menacing growl in his throat, but his associate put a hand on his arm, shaking his head slightly. The game was over. They had lost. Without another word, Burke turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, his associate following him. The sound of their car speeding away down the driveway was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving me trembling. I leaned against the study doorway for support, the papers clutched in my hand. The immediate danger was gone. But as I looked at Serena, cowering on the stairs, her face a mess of terror and shame, I knew the real confrontation was yet to come. The wolves outside were gone, but the viper in my own house remained. The echo of the departing car faded, leaving a silence in the house that was heavier and more suffocating than the previous tension. The immediate, physical threat was gone, but the emotional wreckage remained, strewn across the grand foyer like shattered glass. I stood, leaning against the doorframe, the ledger in my hand feeling as heavy as a gravestone. Serena remained on the staircase, a pathetic, crumpled figure. The cunning, the cruelty, the desperate ambition, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a hollow shell of a woman, staring at the ruins of her own making. Jacob, ever the pragmatist, seemed to be processing the financial and legal cataclysm that had just unfolded. His face was a grim calculator, tallying losses that were total and absolute. I pushed myself upright, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I walked slowly towards the bottom of the stairs and looked up at my daughter. There was no anger left in me, only a profound, aching sadness. He knew, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the stillness. Robert knew you to your very core, Serena. He saw the rot in you, just as he saw it in his own past. This whole intricate will, it wasn't just a test. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to save you from yourself. He gave you a chance to choose service over selfishness, duty over greed. He gave you a path to redemption. And you chose to conspire with his demons. Tears streamed silently down Serena's face, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The truth of my words was undeniable, a final, damning verdict. I turned and walked back into the study, placing the ledger and Robert's letter on his desk. I felt an overwhelming weariness, the weight of 50 years of secrets pressing down on me. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Sterling's private number. It was late, but I knew he would answer. He did, on the second ring. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice clear and steady. It's Eleanor Vance. I need you to come to the house. Immediately. And I need you to initiate the final clause of the will. The forfeiture clause. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then, Eleanor, are you certain? You know what that means. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. Serena has failed in her duties as trustee in the most profound way imaginable. It's over. Within the hour, Mr. Sterling was there, his face grim but his eyes understanding as I recounted the night's events, showing him the ledger and the letter. He read Robert's final words, his expression softening with a mixture of awe and sorrow for his old friend's complex legacy. The final confrontation was a quiet, legalistic affair. We all gathered in the living room, me, Mr. Sterling, and a pale, silent Serena and Jacob. Mr. Sterling laid out the legal documents, his voice a dispassionate drone as he explained the irrevocable consequences of activating the forfeiture clause. By conspiring to cause harm to the primary beneficiary, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, you, Serena Vance Fitzgerald, have egregiously violated your fiduciary duty, he stated, his gaze fixed on her. As per the explicit terms of the will, you hereby forfeit all rights to the Eleanor Vance Benevolent Fund, the property known as Lakeview Haven, and all other assets of the estate. He pushed a single piece of paper across the coffee table. This is a check for $100,000. As stipulated, it is to cover the funeral expenses of your father, with the remainder being your final inheritance. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. Serena stared at the check as if it were a venomous snake. The symbolic sum was a final, crushing insult from her father, a precise calculation of her worth in his eyes after her ultimate betrayal. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply looked empty. All the fight had gone out of her. She signed the necessary papers with a hand that barely trembled, her signature a spidery, broken thing. She and Jacob left the room without a word. I heard their footsteps on the stairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the quiet, efficient packing of a life being dismantled. An hour later, they were gone. I stood at the window and watched their car pull away from the house for the last time, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. There was no triumph in my heart, no sense of victory. Only a vast, hollow emptiness where a daughter's love used to be. Mr. Sterling stayed with me until dawn. We sat in Robert's study, the ledger open between us. "What will you do with it all, Eleanor?" he asked gently. "The house, the money, and this?" He gestured to the ledger. I looked at Robert's letter, at his final, desperate wish for me to decide the money's fate. I knew what I had to do. It was the only way to honor the good man I had loved, and to atone for the secrets of the man I had just discovered. "The money is tainted, Harold," I said, using his first name for the first time in 30 years. "It was born of shady deals and moral compromises. It can't just be spent. It has to be redeemed. I'm going to establish a new foundation," I continued, the plan forming in my mind, clear and certain. "Not in my name. In Robert's. The Robert Vance Atonement Fund. We'll use the money to help people who have been hurt by the very financial schemes and predatory practices that he and men like Calvin Burke used to build their fortunes. We'll fund legal aid for victims of corporate fraud, support financial literacy programs in underserved communities, and offer grants to ethical startups. We will use the fruit of the poison tree to plant a forest of good." As for the ledger, I made a decision. I wouldn't send it to the authorities. Robert's digital failsafe would keep Burke at bay. To release the documents now would only create a public scandal, tarnishing the good Robert had also done, and perhaps implicating people who were innocent. The ledger would remain my silent guardian, the ghost at the feast, ensuring the wolves stayed away forever. Robert's sins would be redeemed not through punishment, but through restitution. Mr. Sterling looked at me, a deep respect in his eyes. "He knew," he said softly. "He knew you'd know what to do." As the first rays of morning light streamed through the study window, I felt a sense of peace settle over me for the first time in months. I had lost a daughter, but I had found a purpose. I was no longer just the keeper of Robert's secrets, but the architect of his redemption. I had survived the storm, and now, it was time to rebuild. Months melted into a year, each season bringing a subtle but profound change to both the house on the lake and the woman who lived within it. The oppressive silence left by Serena and Jacob was gradually replaced by a new kind of quiet, a peaceful, purposeful hum. The grand rooms, once arenas for a cold war of wills, now felt warm and filled with light. I didn't live alone. At my insistence, Mel moved into one of the upstairs guest suites. Her pragmatic wit and unwavering friendship were a daily balm, chasing away the last of the shadows. We'd spend our mornings on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan, and our afternoons were often a flurry of activity. Lakeview Haven was no longer just a home, it was the headquarters of the Robert Vance Atonement Fund. The formal dining room, which had seen so many tense family dinners, was now a boardroom, its polished table covered in proposals and financial reports. Robert's study was my office, and I found I had a surprising aptitude for the work. I was no longer the woman who didn't know the difference between a stock and a bond. I was decisive, discerning, and driven by a clear mission. With Mr. Sterling's expert legal guidance, the fund flourished. We financed a class action lawsuit on behalf of retirees who'd lost their pensions to a predatory investment firm. We established scholarships for low-income students pursuing degrees in business ethics. We saw the tangible results of our work, the lives changed, the wrongs righted. Robert's tainted money was being laundered in the most profound way possible, through acts of genuine good. In redeeming his legacy, I was forging my own. I rarely thought of Serena. I heard through a distant acquaintance that she and Jacob had divorced shortly after leaving. The $100,000, a fortune to some, was a pittance to them, and without the promise of a larger inheritance, their loveless, transactional marriage had quickly disintegrated. Last I heard, Serena was working in a high-end real estate office in Arizona, selling a lifestyle she no longer possessed. There was no contact between us, no letters, no calls, not even a Christmas card. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too absolute. I didn't hate her. I simply mourned the daughter I thought I had, and accepted the reality of the one I'd lost. One crisp autumn morning, a year to the day since Calvin Burke had stood in my hallway, I sat on the porch, a warm mug cradled in my hands. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and decaying leaves, the same scent that had filled the air the day Serena had cast me out. But it no longer held the sting of despair. Now, it was just the smell of a changing season, of life moving forward. I thought of Robert. The man of secrets and shadows was gone, replaced in my memory by a more complete, more human figure. He was a flawed man who had made terrible choices for what he believed were the right reasons. He had loved me enough to build me a fortress, but had also loved me enough to leave me the keys to tear it down and build something better in its place. I had forgiven him his secrets, because, in the end, his greatest secret was his unwavering faith in me. Mel came out and sat beside me on the porch swing, handing me a section of the morning paper. "Page 3, she said, a proud smile on her face. There, in a small but prominent article, was a story about a community center we had funded, one that provided free financial counseling to families on the brink of foreclosure. My name was mentioned, Eleanor Vance, philanthropist and chairwoman of the Atonement Fund. I looked at the words, and a slow smile spread across my face. I was no longer just a wife, a mother, or a widow. I was Eleanor Vance. I was not useless. I was the opposite of useless. I was a force for change, a woman who had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not burned, but forged anew, stronger and more purposeful than I had ever been. The sun climbed higher, its golden light dancing on the rippling surface of the lake. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean air. My life was not what I had ever imagined it would be, but it was, finally and completely, my own. I was the keeper of my own story, the mistress of my own fate. And as I looked out over the water, towards the endless horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. The dawn was here.